Hello there, it's Cassie. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I am back with the Simon Says Stamp February 2019 card kit called Love Always. This kit is actually still available as of filming, so I will link that down below. So let's go ahead and take a look at what comes inside this kit. There's a lot of goodies. These kits are always worth the price point. It comes with candy as always. It has a jar of Simon Says Stamp Unicorn Dust Glitter. It also has a jar of Simon Says Stamp Ultrafine Clear Embossing Powder, one 3-skein set of We Are Memory Keepers So Easy Floss. I use this on several cards. It also has one each of Simon Says Stamp Metallic Envelopes in Cotton Candy, Silver, and Ivory. It has 8 double-sided sheets of Authentique Romance 6x6 papers, and these are gorgeous. It's these kind of papers that make me want to start hoarding paper again. Because they are so pretty. I had a hard time deciding which papers to use. It also has the exclusive Simon Says Stamp Rose Lattice Background 6x6 stamp. This is red rubber. It has a 1-pack of 3 Simon Says Stamp pre-scored black note cards. These are great. I love when they include these. It also has the exclusive Simon Says Stamp Love Always 6x8 clear stamp set. A lot of great sentiments and beautiful vintage images. It has an idea sheet, and it has 1 sheet of Nina Desert Storm 80-pound cardstock, 1 each of Simon Says Stamp 100-pound cardstocks in Dull Pink, Cotton Candy, and Ivory. So let's go ahead and get started on that first card. I have some of the patterned paper, and I'm going to trim that down so it'll fit on the front of the card base that I have chosen, and that's just some of that. The card base is the ivory that came in the kit, and I cut that down to 4 1/4 by 11 inches. And I'm trimming down this pattern paper to 4 inches by 5.5 inches. So it'll leave a little bit of space on the left and right hand side, but the top and bottom will go flush to the card. I'm taking that wonky stitched circle stacks die from My Favorite Things. I'm going to tape that in place on top of that pattern paper, and then I'm going to run that through my Big Shot machine. And then I'll save that little circle for another card. I scored that card base at 5.5 inches to make it a top folding A2 size card, and now I just have some score tape, and this is like in the sheets of score tape, and I have trimmed that down, and it won't cover completely the circle that I have, but I'm just going to go ahead and draw a circle, or draw the circle, so that I know where I want to place that tape. It really doesn't bother me that it's not going to go all the way to the bottom, because I will have an image that will cover the part that would have typically shown. So I've peeled off the backing paper, stuck that down onto my card base, and then I peeled off the release paper on the front. And so now I am going to cover that with some of that unicorn dust glitter. I've got a piece of scratch paper underneath, just copy paper, and I'm covering that with the dust glitter. And then I'll, tap off the excess, take that backing paper that I removed, and then I will burnish the glitter into the tape just to make sure that I don't have a bunch of rogue glitter all over the place. And now I have a piece of Ranger acetate that I have trimmed down so that it will fit behind, and I'm going to stick that inside my Mini Misty. Now this Ranger acetate is not heat resistant. Originally I had planned to use some StazOn ink, but my StazOn pad is pretty dried out, and for some reason I cannot find my re-inker for it. So I actually decided to use something else. So I have used my embossing buddy over the top of that acetate, and then I'm going to go ahead and use some Distress Oxide ink in the color Black Soot. I could have used VersaFine Onyx Black ink. That probably would have even worked better. I'm not sure, but I thought I'd give this a try to see if it was possible. Stamped it out a couple times on the acetate, and then I am going to cover that using that ultrafine clear embossing powder that came in the kit. And then I made sure that my heat tool was super hot before I brought it, and then I'm just barely touching it for a couple seconds, and then I would take it away and do it again because I didn't want to warp that acetate. I covered the back of my pattern paper with some 1/4 inch score tape, and I'm just peeling that backing paper off so that I can adhere my acetate to the back of that. And I just want to make sure that my sentiment will be fairly lined up, centered as much as possible. And then when I have that centered, I'll stick that down. And then I will cover that back with some foam tape. So this isn't obviously a shaker card, but it's kind of neat. It's a window into that glitter, and I think it ends up looking super pretty. So I'm going to tack that down to my card base, and then you can see that glitter from behind. To stamp my image, I'm actually going to use some Neenah 80-pound vanilla cardstock. Neenah cardstock is great for Copic coloring. Y'all know I typically like the Express It, but Neenah is great as well, and I do have some in the vanilla color. So I stamped out my image a couple times, and then I colored it with my Copic markers, but there was no earth-shattering coloring, so I didn't show you. And then I fussy cut that out. And now I am wrapping the skein of We Are Memory Keepers So Easy floss around 3 times, but I put down some score tape just so that I had a place for that floss to stick, and that's not going to be a big deal because I'm going to cover that with the image. So I'll wrap that around 3 times and make sure that it's good and secure, and then I will cover the back of my image with some foam tape, and I will stick that down. So this does have a bit of dimension, this card does. And for a final bit of embellishment, I will use some Nuvo crystal drops in the color Ebony. Once I'm done with that, that's going to finish off card number 1. For card number 2, I was really thinking of like old vintage Valentines, and so I decided I wanted to use some gold embossing powder. That just really screamed vintage to me, and I felt like that really went well with these images. And so I just have a piece of that Neenah 80-pound vanilla cardstock, and I've used my anti-static powder tool over it, and I stamped my image down using the Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink, and then I covered that with the ultrafine antique gold embossing powder by Simon Says Stamp, and it picked up that detail so beautifully. So in order to melt my powder, I'm using my heat tool, and as you can see, it's melting, and it just makes it even prettier. It just picked up all that detail. So I set that off to the side to just cool down a little bit, and while I was doing that, I thought I'd go ahead and stamp out my sentiments since I had everything out. And so I just have some black cardstock from my stash, and I'm doing the same thing. Just stamped my sentiments using the Versamark ink, covered that with that antique gold embossing powder, and then heated the sentiment till the powder is smooth and melted. And then I decided to fussy cut out my heart, which was super simple, and then trim down my sentiments, giving a fishtail banner just to that right-hand side. So in order to do that, I trim into the center, trim off the excess, trim into the center, right down the middle, and then let the edges kind of meet that middle so you get a fishtail. And because I decided to use one of the black pre-scored card bases that came in the kit, I decided I also needed to have probably a vanilla card base or card stock in the inside of my card. So I'm stamping a sentiment, that Forever in Love with You, onto a piece of the cardstock that it measures 4 inches by 5 1/4, and then I stamp that with the Memento Tuxedo black ink, and then I stamp out my hearts using some aged mahogany Distress Oxide ink. I thought that color matched fairly well, and those little hearts are so pretty. You could just go crazy with those hearts. And now it's time to assemble my card. Sorry some of this is going to be off screen for whatever reason. Sometimes I just get in the zone and I am not paying much attention to what I'm doing. So I just used liquid glue on a scrap of some of that card or that patterned paper from Authentique, which is gorgeous. Oh my gosh, I'm just in love with this paper. And then I did the same thing on the back of this bigger piece of cardstock that has the wood paneling. And I'm kind of just making sure that I only leave a small black center in between those 2 pieces of patterned paper, as you can tell. So when I close it up, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. And then I decide to go ahead while I've got my liquid glue out, and I will adhere the inside as well. You could just leave it as is and then just use like a gold pen or even a silver pen, but I wanted to have some more stability in that card base. And now I'm using that floss once again, and I'm using the exact same color. This is that dark red, and I'm gonna, cover that around 3 times like I did before. And instead, this time I'm going to tie a bow. So I want to make sure that I have the bow underneath the heart, where I plan to put the heart. So I'm wrapping that around the 3 times, and then I will adjust where I'm going to make sure that the bow is, making sure that I have it where I want it. And then in order to hold that into place, I grab my reverse tweezers, which if you don't have a pair of these are fantastic. So this way it'll hold that twine or that floss while I thread it into a bow. And it's great. It holds it that whole time, and then you just peel it out when you're ready, and then adjust your bow as necessary. And then I trim that down. So I'm going to adhere my sentiments using the same liquid glue that I've been using. And then I have covered my heart with some foam tape, and I'll take off the release paper on that after I've adjusted my sentiments. And then I'll stick that down, and that's actually going to finish off this card. It's a pretty simple card, but I love this one. So pretty. Card number 3 is going to use a good amount of Distress Oxide inks in some lighter colors. And I'm just going to use the craft mat that came with my glass media mat. I love this thing. I thought it was great that they both came together. And so I'm just putting down some Victorian velvet. I think I also have some tattered rose and some antique linen. And I spritz that with some water, and then I am taking a piece of Kansan XL watercolor paper, and I'm just dropping that in to the color and just smushing it around. And then I will heat set that in between, and then I will do it again using old paper and tattered rose once again, and then I will heat set that as well. And I'm just going to keep going back and forth doing that until I get the look that I like. I end up also deciding that I want to take a mini ink blending tool along with a sponge into those various colors, and I'm just adding that to the edges just to add a little bit more, I don't know, more of a old look to it, I guess, in this case. And I wanted to saturate it with a little bit more of the color. The Victorian velvet is the one that's a little bit darker than the rest, which is really nice, and I love how that ends up looking. And so I decided one more time to do a little bit of the old paper. The nice thing about the Distress Oxides is that they layer on top of each other, and while they mix a little bit, they will sit on top of each other. So now I'm just putting that on my mat, and I'm going to grab a paintbrush so that way I can do some splatters all over the background with that Victorian velvet. And then I'll also do it with the old paper, and I did heat set that in between to make sure that everything was dry. And then I'll set that off to the side to dry. I did want to show you my system for what I've settled on for organizing my mini ink blending sponges. This works out really well for me, and I do just have it on a ring, and then I have a command strip on my wall so that I always have access to it. The musical note stamp inside the set I thought was really pretty, and it makes great backgrounds. So I am just inking that up with some of that antique linen, and I'm stamping that onto my background. It's so subtle, you can hardly see it on camera, but you can definitely see it in person, and it just adds to that texture onto the background, giving it a lot of visual texture. And I really love the way that turns out. I don't know why I didn't use the musical note in more of this cards that I made, but I really like the way this one turned out. Off camera, I did cut some more of that Nina 80-pound vanilla cardstock using the Wonky Heart die from Simon Says Stamp, and now I'm going to stamp one of the sentiments onto it using some Memento Tuxedo black ink, and I really like that sentiment. Even after all this time, I still love you. That's a really pretty sentiment. I've grabbed some frayed burlap Distress Oxide ink and a mini ink blending tool, and I'm just adding that to the edges just to even, make the paper look even older. And I'm putting it around my sentiment heart as well. And then I'll clean up my mess, and I'm going to stamp out my images. I am using some more of that Nina 80-pound vanilla, and I'm going to stamp the bird and the single rose onto some of that cardstock because I plan to Copic color it, and I won't show you because these images are so detailed. You really only need one color. You could do more than one, but really one color is plenty because these images are just so detailed. So I colored those and then fussy cut those out, and now I'm going to start assembling my card. I want my Wonky Heart to stick off the page a little bit for some visual interest, to get your eye moving off the page, just to kind of give you the idea that there's more happening off of the paper. And I used liquid glue to adhere that, and then once I have that down, I will turn that over and cut off the rest of the heart. And then I'm going to use that floss once again after I've used what ink was left on my ink dauber to cover up that one edge. I'm going to grab that floss once again and wrap that around 3 times. I don't want a bow this time, so I'm going to cut that, and I'm actually going to adhere that to the back using some washi tape. Another good way to use up that washi tape that we all have been hoarding. Or maybe it's just me that's hoarding it, I don't know. But that's another good way to use it up. I've covered my images with some foam tape on the back. And then I'm going to adhere my images down to the front of the card. And I just put a little bit on that front part of the bird, and then I also used some liquid glue so I could adhere it to the edge of the rose. I didn't want too much dimension on this card. And so I'll take off the backing paper of my bird, and I'll adhere him down to the front as well. And then to adhere the card panel to the card base, which is just some of that cardstock that came in the kit, I'm just using some liquid glue. And then when I do put this down on my card base, I'm actually going to stick it all the way to the far right. Just a little something different. I know I typically just stick it right in the middle, but I thought this was pretty. And then for a final bit of embellishment, I am going to use some Nouveau drops. These are the matte drops. I can't remember the color, but I will have it listed down below. I didn't write it down for some reason, but I will have this listed down below. And I'm just putting a few of those drops on the card just to finish it off, and then that will finish off the card. I like how this one turned out too. I'm really loving these vintage images. They're just so fun and pretty. I wanted to try something a little bit different with card number 4. So I have a card base that I have just scored at 5.5 inches, and so this is going to be a top folding A2 size card, but I just wanted to see where the fold would be, so I'm using some Post-it tape over the top of that so that when I stamp my lattice stamp set that came in the kit, that I am not going over the back. So I have Versamark ink all over that, which is a water-based or watermark ink and a clear sticky ink, and it was probably completely unnecessary, but this is just the steps I took. So I stamped that out, and I probably could have left it like this, but I did want to use the glitter. So the next step that I use is I grab some of this palette stamp and stick glue pad. This after I take a sip of tea. So this is supposed to be like a glue ink pad, except no ink, so it's just glue on there. And so you re-ink it every once in a while when you need the glue. I stamped that all, covered the back of my stamp set, and then I inked it up, covered my stamp, and then stamped it down, and now I'm just going to cover that with that unicorn dust glitter. And I'm not going to lie, this is really, really messy. I just wanted to see if this stuff would work. And so I clean up my mess and I set that off to the side to dry because it is glue. I burnished it in as well. So I took a piece of scrap paper over the top and just kind of burnished it in with my hand to make sure that the glitter was sticking into the glue. And for my next step, I want to stamp a sentiment onto that Neenah 80-pound vanilla cardstock. So I just wanted to make sure that that circle die would fit over that sentiment. And I'm going to ink that up with some Memento Tuxedo black ink. Stamp that down a couple of times. And then I will use that wonky circle die from My Favorite Things, and I will cut that out in my Big Shot machine. So now I've got some pattern paper that I've trimmed down, and I'm just using liquid glue over these pieces just to adhere those down over the glitter. And yeah, it's a mess. I mean, I'm thinking I'm getting this everywhere. I love shiny things, and I actually like glitter. I just don't really like working with it because I end up having it everywhere. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I'm pretty sure I even got it in my tea. So this was everywhere. And I don't want to get it all any more over my hands than I already have. So I'm trying to be extremely careful because, there is going to be some stray glitter. Even though this was a glue pad, there is going to be some stray glitter that will come off of there. See, I'm even checking my tea. I took a sip and I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure there's glitter in there. So I'll cover my sentiment circle with some foam tape, and then I did end up putting some more of that floss onto my background and tied that. I just didn't think you'd want to see me tying that once again because I did that once already for a card. And then I will peel off my backing paper and stick my sentiment down, and with all that glitter all over the background, I figured this card was done. So that's going to finish off card number 4 once I get everything settled the way that I want it. And it's super shiny, very glittery. For the fifth and final card, I really hadn't had enough of that antique gold embossing powder, so I'm going to use one of those, some of the cardstock that came in the kit. I believe this is the Doll Pink, and I'm going to stamp that heart 3 times onto this piece of cardstock using some Versamark ink, which is once again that clear sticky ink, and I'm just going to stamp that down on there the 3 times. And I love the detail. I know I've said this before, but these images make card making super simple. I mean, you can absolutely color them if you want to, because I've seen some beautiful work done with these, but you don't have to. I love how these look covered in embossing powder, especially this gold. And so I've covered that with the embossing powder, and then I will heat that till it is smooth and melted, and it's such a difference once it starts melting, and there's something so satisfying about watching embossing powder melt. I can't even describe it. I know I'm not the only one out there that loves this. So yeah, I'm going to set those off to the side to cool, and while I do that and I have everything else out, I'm going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment. And once again, I'm going to do this on some black cardstock because I'm loving that antique gold on that black cardstock. And these sentiments are really small that I'm using, and so you wouldn't think that this embossing powder would work so well, but it isn't ultra fine, and it ends up just working beautifully. So I'll heat that till it is smooth and melted, and then I'll set that off to the side to cool down a little bit, and then once it is, I will trim it down with my Fiskars wire paper cutter, and then I will fussy cut out each of my hearts. So that didn't take a whole lot of time. I'll adhere my pattern paper to my card base, and that card base is one of the black card bases that came in the kit, pre-scored and everything. And then I will put some foam tape on the back of my hearts, and I'm just going to use the lines on this pattern paper that I've chosen to make sure that the hearts are lined up fairly straight, and then I'll press those down. And then that third heart is going to be staggered and kind of set on top, and I'm just going to put foam tape on the top part of the heart on each side, and then I'll use some liquid glue on the bottom part of the heart. Just kind of making sure all my placement's good here. So I'll use that liquid glue, peel off the backing paper, and then stick that final heart down. And then I will cut fishtails into my sentiment as well. So I'll trim those down a little bit, cut right into the center, and then each of those corners I will trim into the center so that they connect with that slit that I've just cut, as you can see that I'm doing. So I'll just use liquid glue on the back of that because it doesn't need any more dimension, although you very well could. And then I'll move on to the inside of the card. So once again, this is a black card base, and you could use a gel pen or something like that, but I wanted to use some of that same Neenah 80-pound vanilla cardstock, and I'm going to use some picked raspberry in Distress Oxide, and then because these are really good for stamping. The regular distressings aren't so great for stamping, but these are beautiful for stamping. So I will grab each of the hearts, and I'm just stamping those there on that left hand side. Grab the 2 ones that were outlines, and then I'll grab the bigger ones and stamp those, and then I'll stamp the last tiny one, and that'll finish off my stamping. So I'll grab some liquid glue, put that all over the back, and then I will adhere that to the inside of my card. And once I'm done with that, that's going to finish off this 5th and final card for this series. I really like how that one turned out too. So let's go ahead and take a look at the 5 cards that I made. And I would love to know which one is your favorite, if you do have a favorite. I always appreciate you guys watching my videos. I appreciate the love that y'all give me by liking and subscribing as well. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. I have lots of stuff planned, and I'm always having stuff going. So yeah, so I appreciate you guys stopping by. Thanks, everybody.